and shine. Good morning. Let's see what's happening on the news.
Well, when we saw the civil rights movement, what you saw was protesters violating unjust laws like prohibiting black Americans from eating in the same diners as white Americans. That's violating an unjust law. And then accepting the consequences. So you accept the consequences of your legal violation, which upholds the rule of law. But that's the key. There's an unjust law that you violate, and then you accept the consequences, and you do it all peacefully. Here, in many ways, what they're doing is they're violating just laws. In other words, they're actually in violation of laws that protect the rights of others, and then they're refusing to accept the consequences. They're covering their faces to avoid detection. They're often in outright defiance of the police when the police try to move them. And that's when you're moving from civil disobedience, which is honorable and respects the rule of law, to outright lawlessness, where they're violating just laws and refusing to accept the consequences.
Yeah, okay, so let's break it down. We have seen this play before. When my parents' generation was protesting the Vietnam War, well, for people like my dad, it was mainly because he just was against war. He also had flat feet, and I don't think he'd be drafted even if they tried, wouldn't qualify. He was ready to flee to Canada. So, but anyway, doesn't matter. Did not end up serving. But you know who did end up serving? Many, many other Americans who ended up losing their lives fighting in Vietnam in the late 60s, early 1970s, because there is a lot of corruption around the world. America tends to get involved in other worldly affairs, Vietnam being no exception to this rule. Iraq and Afghanistan, of course, being most recent worldly affairs in the last 20 years. But that's what happened, you had several years of war in Vietnam, then they packed it up, came home. It's not what's happening right now with the situation in Gaza between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Americans are not involved in the way that the college students believe that they are. That is to say, there's about $1 million coming from the budgets of each of these college campuses, roughly, approximate. It's either a little less, a little more, but around hovering $1 million. And what the students are calling for is divestment of all funds. If it's $1 million, if it's $2 million, if it's 500 billion, whatever it is, they want all funds divested from any and all Israeli companies that the schools are doing business with, which is silly for two reasons. One being that if the end goal is to defund Israel to the point that it goes, bankrupt or it's completely broke and indebted to America and the rest of the world, then it can no longer exist. Okay, if your end goal is wiping Israel off the map, I get it. I understand why you're doing that. This isn't the right way to do it, though. You'd have to do it militarily. You can't defund a country that is also providing services on which you rely. I've said this before, but they make the chips that are put into the devices, the phones, that you use every day to set alarms, to check something on Google, which is another of the many companies that obviously partner with Israelis. And then secondly, it's what does this do? What does this prove? That you don't want to receive services from Google or from Starbucks, from Lockheed Martin or any other tech company, I mean, fair enough. But then you'll have to divest from the majority, at least 50% probably, of your own personal life, because your well-being relies upon these services working. And in order for them to work, they have to have people making them function. You know, you got to keep the lights on somehow. So yeah, there are a lot of Israeli companies, a lot of Israeli apps that people across the globe are continuing to use today. So I think divestment is a silly, wasted goal, but you know, this will fall inevitably on deaf ears. And the reality is, when you seek to make your goal opposition, it never works in your favor if what you're opposing is actually on the side of morality. See, the reason the Vietnam War protests were effective to some degree, but also, regardless of their efficacy, the reason they were legitimate is because there were troops on the ground in Vietnam. Last I checked, we don't have a single American troop standing somewhere on guard in Rafah. We provided humanitarian aid, food, and stuff like that. We haven't, we haven't flown American troops to Gaza. It just hasn't happened. So, good luck with the Intifada, and long live the revolution. I'm going to get back to my morning now, so if you'll excuse me, I will see you on another time.